Hi everyone. So I am currently in Miami, Florida, courtesy of PalmStreet, attending the International Aroid Show, but today we are going to be heading out to Dr. Jeffrey Block's place to film a tour of his amazing plants. Perhaps better known to you as DocBlock, the hybridizer of a lot of the anthuriums we all know and love. And I would like to take a brief moment to thank PalmStreet for being the sponsor of today's video. PalmStreet live sales are honestly a great place to find the plant of your dreams and often at a great price. Even Rare Plantberry, an authorized seller of DocBlock anthuriums, is on PalmStreet. And even if you guys aren't looking to buy plants, sellers such as Anthurium Papa often start their live streams with Q&A sessions in which they answer your plant care questions. So use the link in the description below to download the app and check it out. And as an added bonus, you'll get a $5 credit towards your first purchase. Let's go ahead and hit the road. All right, you guys, we are officially at DocBlock's place, and it is absolutely gorgeous, but let's go in and meet the man. I'm officially here with Dr. Jeff Block, who you know better as DocBlock, maker, hybridizer of all of the beautiful anthuriums that a lot of us own and love. And we're going to be walking around and checking out his amazing gardens on his property here. He also has a conservatory with amazing plants, and we're going to check out some of the plants in his greenhouse. So let's go ahead and head out there.
This cat will follow us everywhere. His name is Static, but Static there, he'll be all over you. Watch out, if you pay attention to him, that is. This is a zombie palm. You talk about palms as far as something. Look at the armor on that and take a close-up here of not only the spines, but look how the weaving underneath there stays so perfect because the spines keep little critters off of it. So years and years later, it looks like somebody had a perfect weave of that.
That's awesome.
Over there against there's some cycads and palms, the ferns on the ground. Even right behind you, Selaginella for this ground cover. And you see how it's naturalized in there?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like actually higher than I was thinking when you said ground cover. I was thinking lower to the ground.
Nope, we got some higher than that too. And you'll see I didn't put these maidenhairs here, but by making the right environment, they tend to spread naturally wherever they land, because remember, ferns are propagated by spores, and it's wind or mists and things that tend to transport these.
What's in the back there? It's so dark.
That's Hoffmanii. I'll show you a better grouping of that from another angle. Hoffmanii is also colloquially called the taffeta plant. There's a good site. Well, here, you want to see a better angle for something?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This is an avocado, it is the last one left on the property. These ferns growing up here are called resurrection fern. If it's nice and wet, they're open like that. Otherwise, they're shriveled up. You think they're dead, but they're not. And this, as an orchid, no flowers on it right now, is vanilla.
And I see it like a random little varicosum.
Mm-hmm.
Just growing.
Yeah. They get bigger and they slowly work their way up too. So that was started there many years ago. If you like sizable ferns, here, this one might get your attention. Ooh, you need your wide angle for that. Angiopterite, called mule ferns, M-U-L-E ferns.
It's massive.
Yeah. And other, again, Selaginella, the peacock one color there, even the color here with crotons. So this is all what I like to see in plants: patterns, colors, not necessarily only variegation, but whether it's calatheas or any of this. I just think that having healthy plants is nice in the landscape. I don't prune these at all. I just let them keep growing. So the Hoffmanni over here, this would make a nice close-up there. If you can see the pleating on those leaves is why it has the name taffeta plant. Taffeta being the fabric. You know, remember women's dresses made of taffeta?
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have very clean water, all of those little nooks and crannies would hold on to the salts and you would never be able to grow a plant as clean as that. So this area gets misted as everything does in the property daily, with not just rainwater, but during our dry season with reverse osmosis. And that water makes a big difference because it approximates rainwater rather than municipal water that comes out of the tap. Fluoride may be great for your kids' teeth, but not necessarily what the plant's looking for. Plant's looking for something like God gives it.
Right, exactly.
There's your ponytail. And as you can tell, it's got a symmetrical shape, which is something you generally won't find there. I was here from before Hurricane Andrew. Andrew was in 1992. There were 3 rows of avocado trees here before. So I didn't want to put them back in after Andrew because I knew they were fragile and would come down in storms. So this is largely palms now. There are a lot of fruit trees on the right side here, and the other side has more flowering trees. But that right there is the staple of the property. That is a hundreds, plurals, of years old oak tree. That designates this particular property as being an oak hammock. We're part of the Everglades ecosystem. So we have a bounty of fresh water just 30 feet below your feet. You can pull up water that's potable by law. And so we're kind of blessed with fresh water here for 5 of the months out of the year. It comes from above, and for the other 7, it's the source where we're getting water from below.
That's great.
Well, they're not ripe yet. Well, a couple, look. Do you see, hold on. You see the red there?
Yes.
You just drank this. This is coffee Arabian. This is coffee. I've shown you vanilla, and now coffee. Other tropical trees up here, but again, this is more of the setting between ferns and cycads, bromeliads, palms, some aroids. It's a balance, and it has to be a balance that's not impossible to maintain.
Right.
Because it's just myself here. I have somebody who helps me on weekends. And at this point, it's a project that we've been able to maintain like this because it involves putting the right plant in the right place.
So how much do you have to do to keep it in check so that it just doesn't become completely overgrown, like we know can happen when incorrect types of plants are planted together in incorrect environments?
It's like everything else. In balances, nature finds its own balances. So remember, everybody, I think right now when you're saying that, and people hear you say that, they're thinking horizontal. I think vertical. There's a lot of vertical space in the plant world. Plants tend to grow epiphytically, and they fill that void vertically. So in a sense, then you start with the placement of certain strategic trees for the upper canopy, before you can get the bottom to grow in whatever balance. The light limited, or what I enjoy, are bright filtered light, such as you get under the oak tree I showed you before. The microenvironment there, as well as the droppings from the leaves that tend to help acidify the soils, is actually very important down here, because down here our soils are generally alkaline. It's limestone, coral rock. And that being so alkaline sometimes makes it so that some other acid-loving plants would find it hard to tolerate. That's why an oak tree, which having hundreds or sometimes thousands of years of litter on the ground, the environment around there is relatively more acidic. And lots of plants prefer that because that is slightly acidic, pH is what we're talking about, plants can more easily get their full nutrients in.
Right.
So, we do have one special tree here. That's Lignum vitae, the tree of life. And it's a native tree. This one here is probably a good 100 years old. So very slow growing. The wood is very, very dense. As a matter of fact, in the 19th century, the wood was harvested for ball bearings. It's that heavy, yeah. And so you'll find a lot of ships that use this and other things in industry. Then down here again, oh, well, you're standing underneath some very large and old cycads. Female cycas is the genera. And, they've been growing here for many years.
So for people who don't know the difference, because I do come across this a lot with people, explain the difference between a palm and a cycad.
Epochs would be my best word, meaning time. Palms developed after flowering plants. It's a kind of a tree. Dicot versus monocot are two. Grasses are related to palms, bamboos, palms. While cycads are actually conifers, meaning they belong to a time before flowering plants, when plants had cones. Pines, spruce, firs are all examples of conifers. So when you see, if you could, they're too high here, but I'll show you some in just a moment. You see right there?
Oh my.
Oh my, I knew you'd like that. So that is the cone of a cycad called Diune spinulosum. Has little spiny things on the ends of those leaves. But these were around, dinosaurs ate these, okay, before palms ever thought of being. There's a nice little pond area with some aroids. Colocaceae, I grow in full water, and they do fine. You can see, how healthy the things are. They had a little sprinkler water. Oh, and even a cryptosperma back in there. If you want to see a nice, interesting flower for an aroid most people don't see, come in a little closer.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one in the back. It's almost black, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And that's part of this plant?
Right here, yeah, with the spiny things on the petioles here. Cryptosperma, I think it's Johnstonii. But again, don't ask me the names. Probably the first social media outreach from a group I did a tour for was with the Flowering Tree Society down here. And they had people come by and look at a flowering tree that dropped flowers. And they asked me what it was. I told them what I bought it as. They said, oh, well, didn't you know that changed? They changed the whole genre of that. They put it in another group, and besides, it's this and not that. There was a contentious debate going on online for weeks after. And so the same group came back the following year, and they asked me the name of other things. I said, oh, I learned last year, about what happens. I try to keep records as best I can, but I'm not the collector I was now. I'm the custodian. And as a result, after growing plants for long enough, my answer to you when you're asking me what's the name of that plant is I've never met a plant that cares what I call it.
Good point.
Other than late to dinner. So you look at ways that the plant's communicating with you, and considering that the human genome was just fully finished in 2000 and the very first plant genome in 2003, if you really want to know what that plant is, map out its genes. It'll tell you what its background is, where it comes from. The same way you can put your saliva in an envelope, send it out, and you're going to get a return back saying exactly who you are, whether you realize it or not.
Right.
So the point of having to remember all those names, unless you're a researcher, to me at this point in my career is kind of worthless. I'd rather instead watch, observe the plants, and let the plant talk to me and tell me whatever it wants by any name.
Right. Good point.
Can you catch any of the yellow fruit? This is chocolate. This is cacao. These are the flowers. They're born right on the tree. And if I want chocolate for next year, I just do a little like that. There may be one of those fruits coming here next year. Oh, here's a little one right here. See, I would have done it there before. Chocolate. Even though you're looking up in the sunny side, this happens to be the national champion mango tree for the United States. And it was measured in 2010, and by the Division of Forestry standards for not just height and canopy width, but the height, the circumference apparently of the trunk at 4.5 feet off the ground is a variable that they said, no, that's why this one blew the other ones away. It's just always been here since I moved here, and I don't have any plans to do anything other than to enjoy it. Unfortunately, when they're that high and the mangoes come from this, by the time they hit the ground, it's
no good.
Squash. No, it has too far to fall.
Fruit.
Now, I'm going to show you a real special flower now of a flowering tree that comes from India called a cannonball tree. The fruit actually looks like a cannonball, but the flowers are magnificent. They sort of look like a sea anemone. So you see in the back there, that's the cannonball. That's the fruit on it. That comes from this flower. Little like an anemone, isn't it? Expect the clownfish to come out of there?
All these beautiful crawlers.
Oh, okay. Well, again, aeroids. Burley marks on the ground, but the other gloriosum type things, and otherwise anthuriums, large, big clumps of anthuriums, some amorphophallus leaves up here. It's just a smattering. Remember I showed you the ponytail palm and I told you I got it in our grocery store in the mid-1980s? I also bought a corn plant, Dracaena, the tricolored ones, and I put it in the ground. You leave it long enough.
Oh, wow. This is another thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that some of the plants they buy are technically going to turn into basically a tree.
There it is.
But, we buy them as 4-inch plants, like a Ficus elastica or something like that. And people don't realize that in the wild, this is what it looks like. So it's going to
exactly what
big.
It does. So in here then, well, it's the other side, but now it's lit by the sun on this side. There's the use of Dahlia ferns as a ground cover. See, so these are even bigger than the other ones you thought would be closer to the ground. But they fill that mid-level up and the leaf litter disappears underneath it. So it looks like it's a controlled jungle.
That's a good way to describe it, definitely.
And so controlling it is part of the art of good landscape design. So, for instance, in here, a lot of palms, but I would not put something either so big that you couldn't see anything because of how gargantuan it is, or so small to where it gets swallowed up you never see it. So the placement, the space it has to grow, everything now is vertical. And even though palms aren't normally thought of as hosting a lot of epiphytes, there are some that are grown here, but certainly in all the other trees, you got to start looking up, because a mature garden isn't about what's on the map as you look down. It's what you see when you look up. And looking up, by the way, for the largest palm species in the world, a talipot palm, comes from Ceylon, is behind you.
Oh, wow.
Now you see why you don't want that right next to your home. Your home would look mini and it would probably lose its property value. Crotons do have a place because they give you color even in deep shade. Just happens now the sun is so low early morning that it captures the colors in it, and it's like fire.
These are Thai constellations?
Well, I don't have a name other than a variegated monstera, because these I've had for 25 years. And these are actually offsets from a group behind us. Same thing here, the what do you call it, Hopi, that grows up. It's hard to keep it from climbing and taking over other things. Other aeroids here, just in terms of how they complement under a relatively lower light. We've cut back these chenille plants for that.
This is beautiful. I love
Thank
the
you.
color and look of this.
So yeah, this whole little setting with aeroids is great. And it's all under the shade, not of the oak tree, but another large tree we have here that's magnificent is right here to your right.
Oh my gosh, look at the trunk of that.
This is the silk floss.
Oh, there goes a lizard.
Uh-huh. Silk floss tree. Those are actually modified bark to make those. They're not separately spines. And let's just say they're very effective to keeping the critters from climbing on it, with the exception of those lizards. Beautiful pink in October flowers, and then a life cycle where parrots come and eat the fruit, drop fiber on the ground, which is why it's called a silk floss, because it's like, you ever see dandelion fiber? Except in such quantity that it will make it look like there's frost on the ground here.
This is actually one of my favorite types of flowers.
The shrimp plants?
Yeah, the shrimp plants. I love it. And especially the red ones that hang down and look really like shrimp.
But again, they're just growing as a naturalized clump for years and years. And They don't even mind taking hard cutbacks on it. I guess we shouldn't be amiss to forgetting that Asian plants, whether it's, rhapis, palms or bamboo. Here's a beautiful black.
You're getting tripped by a cat.
Yeah, I warned you about that. Look how black here.
Oh, they're so dark.
Yeah, and so bamboo does very well here. This is closer related to palms than oak trees. They're all in the same basic monocot family. These here, this is a croton, and when you look at the markings on those leaves, you go, who did that?
Yeah, it looks like it's almost been painted.
Mm-hmm. I was telling you before about crotons in the afternoon. When the sun's on that croton, it really looks like the burning bush. I can show you what I think is a featured thing here of staghorn ferns. And perhaps one of the prettier staghorn ferns we have is this Platycerum coronarum. It's native to the Philippines.
What's it growing on?
It's a ball that's wrapped in its own self, and it's just in a favorable environment, not just because of the oak tree litter, but because of the dappled light. And the fact is, you don't see it running now, but every day there's a mist of the cleanest reverse osmosis water to keep the canopy hydrated the way it would be if it was up in a cloud forest.
That is the most stunning staghorn fern I have ever seen.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, actually, you want to see a very pretty palm? You see off in the corner there?
Yes.
Certostachys renda, the red sealing wax palm. That's the largest specimen in the continental U.S. Generally, people think of Miami as being warm, but it still gets relatively cold here a few times in the year. So there are people who can grow this here, but not plant it outside. It's where that one has not only thrived like that, but I've germinated seeds from that and shared them with people. And so that's the first of this known to have been propagated from seed to specimen to seed, all outdoors, planted out here. This is a plant called Clusia. Now, Clusia is kind of bulletproof. These are very thick, almost succulent. It's not a succulent, but this is the variegated form of it. It will grow into a tree. So if you look closely, it's planted underneath there in one terracotta pot, not even a big one at that, but it's grown as what's called an esplanade, two planes like this. And compared to the non-variegated form that just is probably used too widely, this has an ornamental value.
A lot of people had asked me, out of all the hybrids you've created, what is your personal favorite? And I don't know how you could choose one, but they wanted me to ask, so I'm going to ask.
I don't have a favorite. They're like your kids when you read them, right? How do you pick this one? There's been timing with things. There have been plants that I've named after people, some of which I'm, may be more dear to. Michelle's my wife. So I don't necessarily let any plants know I have favorites. However, I'm fond of the general family of plants that would be considered as epiphytes. And that's because I started actually more with bromeliads and orchids, later on ferns, which again, can be terrestrial, but very often are growing up in the trees. That whole method of growing, of trying to duplicate the conditions, bright filtered light, excellent ventilation, a source of constant humidity, those are all things that plants would encounter in their favorite environment in the canopy. And I try to duplicate those conditions. So when people ask, well, what should my media be and things like that, generally those are things more associated with water use. I use water to cool. I actually use water to heat too, just coming from different places. But water then, because of how much I use of it, requires me to have pots that are very open and draining. And the media I use is probably more open and draining than most people do. Some of the media that people use, though, unless it's kept evenly moist and let to dry out and then fill up again, if it's too compact, will almost become what's called hydrophobic. It becomes like a block. And then you put water on it and it spills over the edges but doesn't get down. So I tend to use some things that have some organic properties. I use perlite in bigger pieces to ensure really good drainage. And I'm kind of particular about the quality of the water that I'm irrigating with too.
Definitely. And I in regards to water, also, I did have a lot of people asking about how, I guess, how wet anthuriums want to stay, or do they want to dry all the way out in between waterings? And once again, I tell people all the time, this goes back to what kind of media you're using, what kind of environment you're in. And I personally have found that it also just depends on the particular anthurium. I feel like some of them don't necessarily like to dry all the way out, or if they dry all the way out, you better not go an extra day too long past that before you'll start seeing issues on the leaves. I just feel like some of them are more tolerant of watering inconsistencies, like if sometimes you go too long in between and sometimes you go too soon. Whereas some of them that I have grown, it seems like if you aren't just keeping it just how it wants to be, if you just go that extra day, it could throw a fit and start giving you yellow spots on the leaves and things like that. So I feel like there's not a solid answer to this question, but I got it asked a lot, so I'm going to let you give me your take on it.
I think a lot of the answer to how much water is there is relative to temperature. Because a plant such as the velvet-leafed anthuriums, I think, are more tolerant, not of drought, but of intermittent, more complete drying, and they will have less problems if people let that happen as compared to keeping it too wet too long. Especially in the heat, that's where bacteria breed and thrive. And so I personally have found that for where I grow and how much water and heat we have, that I do better with a little less constant water at the root zone. But remember, these anthuriums, when their older leaves are there, those older leaves will splay out and sometimes block water from getting down to the media. So I will trim away those lower leaves just so I can get the water down to the root zone, but still let the roots largely dry out between waterings, not to get parched. The difference with anthuriums, the velvet-leaf ones, is their turgor. The actual thickness of the leaves is considerably more than colocaceas and alocaceas that would not be tolerant of drying out that much. But that's, again, the reason why I think velvet-leafed anthuriums can be so popular, because they really don't take as much attention and care as you might need. But if they're there every day and you remember, a couple times a week, throw some water on it, it will reward you with nice, hopefully vigorous growth and a root system that's not drowning in water, which is, because they grow up in trees, not what they're ever going to encounter in their native environments. Right. So I err on the side of less water, but not less times, less water by making sure that what I put in the pot is still be able to freely drain out of the bottom.
Which is why we saw all of those pots with tons of slits in
them. That's for a reason. It's not only for water drainage, it's also for the roots to stay aerated.
Exactly, so we don't have rot. Yes.
Yeah, so I find more people have problems with too much care.
Yes, we helicopter parent our plants and overlove them.
Sometimes benign neglect will reward you. And if you have two of the same plants, try different ways on both and experiment. That's part of the fun of this. If you have two of the same, or even more than that, even grown in different locations, that's your own little controlled experiment. So to do it and to be a good observer, that's what docs are. Physicians are supposed to be good observers. Plant people, would stand well to observe something and write it down.
That's what I was about to say.
Don't reserve. Yeah, your memory is just so good. But I keep data, and I don't see why I shouldn't. Why should I make the same mistake multiple times?
People ask me a lot, like, well, how is it that you got into plants, got so many at once, and you didn't just kill a bunch of them in the process? And I always say it's because I did my research on where they come from, what kind of care they're potentially going to need, not living in that environment, living in my environment. And I have two notebooks that I just wrote down, and I took pictures too, like with my phone. I would take pictures of the plant. Okay, it's doing something weird. What did I do this week? And then I would adjust it the next week. And if that problem didn't continue to get worse or anything like that, I would say, okay, well, apparently that was not what I needed to be doing. And I think a lot of times people get into plants and they're just so busy, or they get too many at once, that they aren't taking that time to stop, look, make a note, think about it logically to adjust it. Because that's what we do in our regular life. Like if you're not feeling well, you go through like a diagnosis process in your head, like, okay, maybe I just have a cold. Or maybe it's just allergies. And then the next day you have a fever. Okay, well, maybe it's the flu. Like we go through this, we observe what's going on with ourselves. So it makes sense, like you're saying, to do the same thing for our plants to learn how to keep them happy and healthy.
Well, to begin with, I've killed a lot of plants. Okay, you may not see it as frequently now, but that's part of learning.
Right.
And again, keeping data and killing plants, that information's far more valuable than your successes. You learn more from your failures.
Right.
So I have killed plants. When I invest in a plant that may cost a lot, as I may have said before, I might try it again to see if I'm able to correct whatever it is I think that was wrong there, or maybe I didn't make an early enough intervention. The reason why physicians are having to be good observers is because if there is a problem going on, the earliest intervention before the plant gets sick is going to likely give you the best outcome.
Right.
And if the plant dies, and now you've lost 100% of what you've invested in that plant, nothing to show for it, you better have a good, at least what they call hypothesis, an idea. Maybe why do you think that plant died before you invest in a second one?
Exactly.
And if you were wrong and you kill the second one, grow a different kind of plant. Yeah.
Some plants just aren't for everyone. That's how it is. Like I do well with calathea, and a lot of other people who live like 10 minutes from where I live, it's just not their plant. It just doesn't work for them, and that's okay.
So we're in the conservatory now, and in here there's pretty much just a screen enclosure, but the conditions, the water and the light and the air movement, there are actually fans that go here for most of the day, let me grow things like this. Even Taka integrifolium, beautiful flower now. What's called the white bat plant is highly ornamental.
I did get a request to meet your birds.
Peaches?
Yes. A few of my subscribers have birds.
Okay, well this is Mango.
Mango, that's very loud.
Yeah, that Mango's loud. Can you tell why she's colored that way?
Yes, beautiful.
It's all excited. Sit up. Hi, Mango.
Hello.
Well, Peaches here.
Hi, Peaches.
Peaches is a little more gentle. Hi, Peaches.
You're a very pretty bird.
Hey, girl.
Very pretty bird.
Saying, hey, what's that?
So are these mother plants or just ones you're keeping just for aesthetic purposes?
I actually, which one? All of them, you mean?
Like the big ones
Yeah,
in the pots?
you see, those are 11-inch pots that I've used for breeding called accelerator pots. They've got holes on the side. Extra good for drainage and aeration of the roots. Very freely draining. And the tendency of these plants is to climb. Not as fast as a philodendron. Do you see on the rock wall there they're growing? That started at the ground level and now they're growing up the wall. That's many years of climbing, but that's what their habits are. So when you go to their native environments, you won't only see these just at the ground level, you'll see them starting to go grow up other things. Their epiphytic nature then, their tendency to climb up, is what allows those roots to grab onto neighboring things and to anchor on. This grouping here are all retired breeding plants, and I will likely auction these all off as one big lot. You know, that'll perhaps be sometimes late this year, next year. There's no rush, but each of these are grown as specimens in those same 11-inch accelerator pots, but you can see from the growth that these are fully rooted, large breeding size plants. And I've never made these available before, but every year I will reduce those plants that I'm using because I make selections of, at that year, what I've regarded as the best of the best. And that's what I would use for breeding now. So these are all 2020 to 2023 retired breeding plants, and there's about 50 of them.
So speaking of the best, one of the questions I got was why your plants, your anthurium in particular, seem to be so much hardier and easier to grow than other anthurium. And you mentioned to me that that is pretty much by design, and I got the impression that you do not like slow growing, super fussy.
No, life's too short.
Anthurium.
Life's too short for that. So, for instance, if a breeder is comparing lots of seeds and the seedlings that come up, even if I have a large community tray and I've just put lots of seeds in, when they start to come up, some of them are the studs. Some of them are the ones that are really growing quickly. Some of the ones may have a better color form, but whatever the phenotype, people think of phenotype as being the descriptive word for what it looks like. If what it looks like is unique and appealing to me, I'll try to select for those, but the ones that really get my attention are the ones that come up and are fast growing, so I will select specifically those. If you do those kind of selections generation after generation, what in fact you're breeding for is not simply a plant that looks nice, but one that is robust, vigorous grower. And so the best feedback I get from people who are growing my plants is they're telling me, this is easy to grow. It grows faster than the other one. That's by design, by selecting out those which seem to be most vigorous. And not just for one generation, but for many. And I kind of love hearing that feedback, because some people like visually one thing or another, but everybody likes a plant that's easy to grow, including me. So I don't grow plants that have very few seeds or taken a long time to mature or ripen or even germinate. If something hasn't germinated in 60 days, chances are it's not going to. And if a plant such as, say, Clarinervium is a good example, beautiful plant, but it holds very few seeds and it takes a long time to mature on the flower. Commercially, probably not the first thing I'm going to spend 2 or 3 times as much time with as compared to different color forms of things that people seem to like from Anthurium magnificum and Anthurium crystallinum lineage.
Right, makes sense. Just noticed these lovely alocasia hanging out.
Yeah, they just come up year after year. They'll die back in the dead of winter, but then they just come back in little smatterings. And the polka dotted one to your left is actually a type of Dracaena.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Tillandsias, every once in a while, have fragrant flowers. These are fragrant also. So no soil, no dirt. When they do this, it just reminds me of how beautiful things are without really much work other than keeping it off the ground, because it's an epiphyte, and having some humidity that the plant itself just absorbs. It doesn't need roots to do this.
Right, so there's like absolutely, so everybody's clear, 0 roots on this.
Oh yeah, and that's all it needs. I forget the name of this right off, but obviously it's discolored, not just variegated, but the discolor refers to what's on the underside of the leaf, which is decidedly reddish pink. So when it goes through the sun, it captures that pink glow. The interesting thing about this particular plant, even in the non-variegated form, is if you cut a piece of this off and then throw it in the pond, the fish will die. And it's used by indigenous people purposely for that. There must be some type of a toxin in it that fish cannot tolerate. So, but nevertheless, again, from an ornamental perspective, it's kind of a pretty.
Where is it indigenous to?
I don't know, but we could certainly look it up sometime. And other bromeliads that years ago we would put on this oak tree. There's staghorn ferns up there, there's orchids, there's bromeliads. There's a great host, because lots of little nooks and crannies that they can put their roots in.
So I did get a lot of questions about breeding. Obviously, we know that certain information is not something that breeders readily share, but I think most of my questions that I got from people are pretty straightforward. So I did get a question about compatibility. So we know that some anthuriums, like if you try to hybridize, it's just not going to work. And I think people are curious what it is about certain anthurium that makes them incompatible.
Oh, well, now we're talking genetics then. All right. So if your listening audience wants a little brief primer on those genetics, obviously genetics differ in plants the way they differ in people. So over time, you can find which plants seem to marry well with others. And from the time of the conception of the plant, the conception is what happens when a pollen from a male flower is transferred to a receptive female flower. It's never going to be the same flower, because the flower first goes through its female receptive phase before that same flower is no longer receptive and then puts pollen out. So having multiple plants is what allows you to have pollen to put on a receptive female, or storing some pollen or having a very vigorous plant where the previous flower has gone through the female and now is putting pollen out that you would use on the next flower that now is starting to show its receptive stage. So timing. Timing's like everything. In a sense then, having everything at the right stage of timing involves the female flower having almost like little dewdrops. And that gooey liquid on the outside is slippery, and it takes that pollen and brings it in to basically do the conception stage. And then I'm not fancy with when I do my propagation. I won't take paintbrushes out. If a male flower has pollen on it, this is the male flower, I'll take my hand and I'll do this around it, get the pollen on my fingers. Then I'll go find a female flower someplace else. I'll put it on. It's just getting down and dirty, not very technical. So that would be really the stage of conception, or, well, in a crude sense, it involves timing, lubrication, and penetration, like all other things you think about, which sort of brings to mind, when is a plant ready to hold fruit, to propagate? For any plant, it takes a lot of energy to reproduce. It takes it away from the mother plant. And with fast-growing, vigorous plants, even when they're small, you'll sometimes start to see the first one or two flowers coming out behind each leaf. That may look great, and it's a nice contrast to what the leaf looks like to see a few flowers in a plant. But just because that plant has put out its first flower doesn't mean there's enough root energy in the pot yet to support the demands that turning that flower into something that could produce seeds through berries and fruit production. All of that is very exhausting for that mother plant. Got to be big and strong to tolerate the stresses of reproduction that way. So holding back on that new plant for perhaps even a year before subjecting it to something that you want to make more rather than by cuttings, now by actually pollination, is something left perhaps for a year down the line when the plant has more root energy that is established.
Right, that makes sense. So this actually brings up an excellent question, because this has been kind of an ongoing debate with the subscribers on my channel, and I feel like it's a 50-50 split. Like 50% of you guys out there think that if you're not interested in doing hybrids or reproducing or anything of that kind of sexual propagation with your plants, and I feel like this actually comes up in conversation more in regards to alocasia than anything else. Like 50% of the people are like, chop that flower off because it's just, the plant's gonna start killing off leaves. And now I've got about the other 50% saying, no, it'll kill off leaves if you don't let it go through that cycle, because it needs to go through the full hormone cycle, or else it's detrimental to the plant. So what is your take on this? And is it better to chop that flower off when it comes in to let the plant have all that energy for their leaves?
I do that. I will do that. I will take away flowers that at times are superfluous, but I do it by design to younger plants so that I put more energy into the next leaves. Once it has a full complement, then that's different. But there is a pairing, though, because I had mentioned after each leaf in a vigorous growing plant comes a flower, and it comes on the same plane, if you've noticed, as the leaf before. If I do pollinate that flower, I've always thought that it has a relationship with that pairing leaf. So even if, as the flower matures, that leaf starts looking a little ratty, I figure it's because it's paired with that flower and it's putting all of its maternal energy into seeing how well that flower will do. So I won't cut away that leaf if I'm working on holding seeds in that flower. We're going to go in this house now.
So I think people might be shocked when they're watching this to see that there are grow lights on in here, considering it's daylight and the daylight's coming through.
The daylight, though, first of all, these lights, as good as they look, it's not equating what the full sun overhead, even through this plastic, would bring. What I do is I give supplemental light on any days that are not fully 12 hours of sunlight. Why? Because the plants evolved at equatorial Colombia, South America. Their genetics are used to getting 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And so I'm trying to duplicate what it would normally have evolved through by having these lights on for 12 hours, which only really starts to happen this time of the year and continues through when do the days get even again? Next June, right? So, you know, it's just the way you mitigate light, the same way water conditions, air movement, light, they're all different variables, and the plants evolve under certain ones that I try to duplicate. It made sense. These are colocaceas, and even Frederick, which, you know, some alocaceas and colocaceas will grow here. But these are highly dependent on water. They're almost kind of flimsy. If they dry out, they're going to wilt right away. And managing water quality indoors and things is not as easy as some people think it could be. So anthuriums, on the other hand, have nice big leathery leaves. You know, the turgor in these. And again, this is a bigger specimen, but grown in a pot that has those holes in a very open, loose media. Now there's a nice leaf. That actually is the same plant back there as the Michelle that was entered in the TPIE show 2 years ago. Let me pull out the bottom of that leaf just to show just how nice these are when they're new. They're a little more, you know, flimsy now until they harden off, but there's a good example of the colors of a Michelle.
Tell us why you chose to name that particular plant Michelle.
Because I have deference for my wife, the name involved, and to make sure that people don't just think this is my show. They're things, and I name plants after people not only that I like, but who have been involved with what I've done along the way. So there's Anthurium Brielle, there's an Anthurium Lynette, there's an Anthurium Zara, all names of people I know's family. There's a classic plant that was shared with me years ago. This is one of the original Delta Force plants that was bred not by me, by Steve Knock, a neighbor, and he passed away years ago, but this was a Clarinervium hybrid that he did, and very few other things. Nothing came out just like that. This is Black Widow, which is a different veining pattern entirely. The original plant was not as dark as this and not necessarily selected for this particular section up here, that when my kids saw that, they said, "Oh, Dad, that's like Spider-Man." Anyway, Black Widow seemed to be a sexier name than Spider-Man, hence it got that name. Other plants through here, this is a different type of the Hoffmannia or taffeta plant, a little smaller leaf than the ones you saw. But for other aeroids, people don't take enough appreciation sometimes looking at caladium. So I'll show you two caladium by comparison now, this one being from New Guinea. And again, black stems, but obviously interesting leaves here. Oh, Cupria. Yeah, and again, when they're wet, it's nice, but when they're dry, they still have that shiny metallic look. And so in a grouping like this, yeah, they're beautiful this way. But for another caladium, how about if we go over here a minute? Because I'll show you Caladium Humboldtii. Caladium Humboldtii.
So white.
Yes, very white. A little miniature dwarf. But again, this is a variety called Marcel. And again, tiny little bulbs, much smaller than the last one I just showed you. But caladiums in the aeroid family, I think, are undervalued.
A lot of people are curious why we're always told, like with Monstera and things like that, you don't want the leaves to go all white, the plant will die. But why is it that caladium are able to survive?
Great question. Actually, an aeroid colleague from years ago, Sid NC is his nickname, told me that these plants actually have a chlorophyll that's doing the absorbing, but it's not right at the surface. It's a little further underneath, because you would wonder, why would a plant with that much white still be able to live like this? Part of it probably also involves it's coming from a bulb, where the bulb itself has some energy, but apparently the levels that bring in light energy from photosynthesis are not necessarily those superficial levels that are reflecting back at you. So that was the answer I got for that, and I found it to be innovative. Oh, well, you probably recognize the Spiritus Sanctum, but this being the red form, where you can see how decidedly pinkish red, or even the undersides are of this.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
Then we have things like this hanging around.
Oh yeah, lipstick plant.
Lipstick plants. I don't know why more people don't grow these. They're very easy to grow here. Now something that you're going to have to touch in order to appreciate what I'll show you now in these plants. But what I want you to do is I want you to imagine first the softest leaf you've ever felt.
Got it.
And then why don't you feel one of these leaves here and then tell me what you think.
Oh my.
Tell people why you're saying, oh my.
Okay, so first of all, the leaf that came to mind for me was a Calathea warskowesii leaf, because very velvety, very soft. But this, even though it kind of looks like it might not be, it's just super fine, very soft hairs that are probably kind of hard to see on camera.
It's almost impossibly soft.
It's almost like fur.
Yeah.
Like you're petting a cat.
Mm-hmm. Variegated things are hot, and even are certain palms. So these are Certostachys rendas, but where the red is complemented with some white in the leaves. Again, a small young plant, but I'm cautiously optimistic will grow into something nice. Other things here, aglaonemas. You like aglaonemas?
Oh yeah.
There's a nice big specimen there.
Is that one pot?
Yep. Yeah, that could have been an example I would have brought into a show, but it gets to be too cumbersome to carry in. Fire fern. This is not something we see down here, and I hardly ever see it. It's actually, I think, in the Oxalis family. But tiny, it has yellow flowers when it does its thing, so they stand up in nice contrast. I've grown this up, and then it dies back 3 or 4 times, but it's still hanging on. That one I've won many awards in. It's a Varesia called Splendid Vista out of California, Vista, California, where the innovator from that did it. I was going to show this to you. This is a variegated Tillandsia cyanea. You see the variegation on it?
Mm-hmm.
And you see those flowers, rather ornate?
Beautiful.
Now's the fun part. Smell it.
Smells lovely.
Close again.
Yeah.
Look at the leaf markings here of the cryptanthus there. Now those cryptanthus are terrestrial, the exception for most bromeliads, and so you could grow that considerably differently than most epiphytes.
I think a lot of people are really attracted to darker leafed plants, especially when it comes to Anthurium. They like those borderline, like looking black type leaves. And I think sometimes they have a misconception of when they're not as dark as they want them to be, what they should do to the lighting to make them darker. Because I think a lot of people are like, well, I need to give them less light. Less light will make a leaf darker. Some people think, oh, it's obviously not enough light, which is the actual case.
Well, too much light can cause sunburn, and in plants sometimes that is expressed, instead of sun burning darker, actually being a little more what they call chlorotic. It looks like it's bleached out, like hair would look from too much sun. However, the plants themselves would prefer, in general, to stay in enough light to where you let the plant grow through the different colors. Every one of the plants that I tend to like are the ones that express colors mostly in the newer emerging leaves. So it will go through stages. And here's a tip off, because any kid in grade school will remember this from when they took their crayons and they marked one color on another. Michelle, for instance, is known for a violet or purple new emerging leaf that over time will morph through almost to black, as you were mentioning, before it settles on a dark green. That evolution of color, if you took a purple crayon and then on top of it you put green, you know what the resulting color almost looks like? Black. In contrast to that, DocBlock Red Crystal, which is going to be announced pretty soon, that is known for a type of a cross that, again, even though it's called red crystal, there's actually some magnificum in there too, to produce a new emerging leaf that's far more red than purple. If the same analogy was a kid had a crayon and you took red and you mixed it with green, you wouldn't get black, you get brown. So those new red leaves are expected to evolve through shades of brown before they get green. So your question's saying when somebody wants to try to get something to look real black or real color of this, part of it's the timing, depending on how new or older that new emerging leaf is. And the other variables that can affect it are the rate of growth, meaning that if it's constantly putting out new flowers, you may see 3 different distinct colors on a plant. The new emerging red, maybe a brown, as well as the final dark green. That's where people see things in the plants, hopefully by hybrids that are more appealing to look at because of those multiple colors. You're not going to be able to get a plant to stay on the black. It will continue to mature and get green, but there are ways that some people have found to sort of extend the color stages. And a lot of that is temperature related. So a cooler temperature slows down the metabolic rate of the plant and lets it stay in that emerging color form stage a little longer than something grown under more heat, water, a vigorous grow season time of year, that they'll go right through those stages faster. The good news is when it does and a new leaf comes out, it's got the color you're looking for, but sometimes just 2 or 3 days of that color and then, oh, it's not that color anymore. Be patient, another one's on the way.
I think a lot of people don't think about like temperature and how it affects things, but there is one plant in particular that I bring this up with all the time, and that's the philodendron. I'm probably going to butcher the name, Paricio verde, where most of us buy them as like this beautiful white and green speckled variegation on there, and we bring them home and they turn all green. And a lot of the people I've talked to who have successfully grown them, it seems to be they just like to be hot. And if they aren't hot, they aren't going to keep that variegation. So it kind of makes sense that if that holds true for a plant like that, it's going to hold true for pretty much any plant. Temperature could affect kind of the appearance of what you're seeing.
Well, variegation can affect different plants different ways. The Japanese are famous for dwarf rhapis palms that have variegation in them. If I put that plant outside and it picks up nutrients from the soils, or if I feed it too much, bye-bye variegation. The green takes over. Variegation can be good and sometimes not good for plants. If you mentioned philodendrons, but not just the one that you couldn't quite recall the species name, but many philodendron people breed and want to get, not a green with a little yellowish variegation, but white. And I love the difference between a deep forest green and white right next to it. But as that leaf matures, especially in philodendron colocaceous too, it's the white tissue which doesn't have the same full complement of green chlorophyll that will tend to look ratty first and tend to decompose first. So yes, it may be genetically as the plant grows out less and less white to where it just reverts back. That's a sign of how stable or not the variegation is in the genome. But there's another thing about variegation that I want you to hear a historical quick story about. Hundreds of years ago, the Dutch are famous for having bred tulips. And the epitome of the most valuable tulip that was available then was black. Talk about the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would go literally for a king's ransom, a whole year's salary for collectors, because the Dutch at that point in history had a lot of money from discovering things in the New World. So among those black leaf tulips, some people started to find a way to put some variegation in it with fine little white stripes. And there are drawings of it long before photography of black with fine little white stripes. Exactly the kind of thing that aeroid fans would find so appealing today. The interesting thing about those little white stripes is that they actually come from what's called a mosaic virus. And so viruses can be transmitted from one plant to another, one genus maybe to another, including even in a cannabis grow, smoking cigarettes because of tobacco mosaic virus may be very harmful to that crop. So growing inside, in particular, where the air's trapped and contaminants that can carry viruses from plant to plant may not necessarily be a good thing. Finally, I also see some people showing a plant that is truly not variegated, but showing a weak plant where the full chlorophyll is not seen as it would be in a healthy plant. And with all of the interest in variegated plants, unfortunately, there are sometimes unscrupulous growers who market it as a new variegated plant when some of the pictures I've seen show maybe the little stipule markings that may have been from an insect that actually has been sucking the chlorophyll out of little
Right.
sections of the plant. So be wary. The caveat emptor, buyer beware. When they see a plant, try to do your research, look for examples in a plant that's variegated of not only when it's small, can you show me that when it grows up to a larger specimen? They're all very sensible questions for a savvy buyer.
Right. And you had mentioned to me before when we were talking about kind of your personal opinions on variegated anthurium. So it seems like for the most part, you are not a huge fan of a lot of the variegated anthuriums that are kind of popping up out there.
Well, I won't say that about all anthuriums. I've seen some beautiful bird's nest anthuriums. So
Right.
I grow, and I know mostly for velvet leaf anthuriums,
Right.
different sorts of anthuriums. In velvet leaf anthuriums that I like growing, and I mentioned earlier, generally crosses of hybrids between Anthurium magnificum and Anthurium crystallinum.
Mm-hmm.
Both traditionally, when I first started with them, largely green with white veins. In those two plants, because of the clean plant having such a nice velvety texture, regardless if the color is green or red or violet, that velvety texture, the sheen that you get, to me, with the vein patterns distinguishing what you see in contrast from the leaf surface, I generally find that when I see one of those velvet leafed anthuriums with the variegation markings that are some here, some there, with great irregularity, that to me it distracts from the symmetry and the contrast of the nice veins. So I'll select for vein patterns that if it happens to come out in a variegated way, I don't see it as readily as I do with variegation mixed in there. So coupling that with the possibility that maybe there's a virus at foot, or that I had a stressed leaf and maybe one leaf comes out variegated, but the next ones are just normal. I haven't been holding on to those particular things to thinking that they're more valuable necessarily, because at least my hybridizer's eyes for what I find pleasing, and let's face it, I grow plants that I think are appealing, whether they're easy to grow, more visually appealing, or just look something so different than something else to where it stands on its own. Variegation hasn't fallen into my collector's mode for those velvet leaf anthuriums, but we look today, and I showed you several variegated plants outside. They can be quite beautiful in certain plants.
Right. And I think for me, and just to remind my audience, you guys know I am a to each their own. Just because you think that type of anthurium, variegated anthurium, you love it, that is 100% okay. We're all entitled to our opinions. For me, I think it boils down to I feel like it doesn't look purposeful. Kind of almost looks like a mistake sometimes. And to your point, sometimes maybe it is. That is exactly what it is. It was just some damage to a leaf. Could have been a virus, could have been whatever. Whereas some of the plants that we looked at earlier outside, it looks more purposeful. And I think that's the difference for me personally in terms of, do I want a variegated version of this plant versus do I not care to have a variegated version of this plant? But this kind of leads me into a question people had about pricing as well. We know variegated plants just go for a premium, primarily just because they're variegated. But we have seen a big fluctuation in prices with the big boom during the pandemic. And now prices have started to come down. But a lot of people are saying anthuriums is where it's not coming down. And I got a lot of questions wanting to know what your take is on the current pricing in the anthurium market. Do you think it's crazy high? Are you shocked by how high it is? And do you anticipate it coming down? And I know through our conversations that we've had prior to today that in your mind, like you would like everybody to have better access to some of these anthuriums. So I'm guessing a lot of the pricing may have shocked you over the last few years with the ups and downs.
It has. And it's a big bubble, just like those tulips that the Dutch had, where they thought everything was going to be so valuable. When there's a lot of money in an economy, and there's the new hot plants, especially with a collector's mentality. And I didn't say everybody who's a collector hoards, but non-selective collecting is fraught with problems like that. So in terms of the pricing of things, I'll first have you know that's not where I'm involved with my plants. I'm a hybridizer developer, but I work with only a few authentic growers and sellers, and I rely on the people who are in the selling side to determine the prices of things, with one proviso. I don't want the plants that I breed and work relationships with the growers and sellers to be either the most expensive or the cheapest. I think the price will fluctuate as the market does. I'm fine in being mid-market, because when people start to grow these plants and the economy changes and that bubble, so to speak, of relative overvalue with aeroids right now starts to contract. If I was a smart shopper, I'd be looking for two things. I'd be looking, if I like the plant to begin with, how does it look, perform, and the physical parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd also be looking at the vigor. I'd also be looking, how easy is this plant to grow? So when I select plants, it's not simply what it looks like as far as, purples, reds, or things. It's selecting for choosing those that are the most vigorous growers. So when you look at a plant that is a vigorous grower and beautiful and priced fairly, in this case, middle of the market, that translates to the word value. And I'm fine at any price point if those components of value are met, and they're going to change. It looks like everything over time will continue to come down to earth. And, I'm interested in it because I think it's wonderful that they have such value to people who are now buying them. But I don't want to be the most costly, and I don't want to be the smallest little things that could be sold for the cheapest either. I think there's a certain amount of people that if they buy something too small without the reserves or the roots, their investment, whether big or small, may be down the toilet when it dies. And how many investments would you make to where you lose 100% of your investment because the plant died?
No.
However, you may go back and buy another one
Right.
and try again. Hopefully you'll know why that first plant died so you don't kill two.
Right.
For me, I've tried that sometimes. I don't often try a third time.
Right.
There's a learning curve there. And sometimes not everything, even though you see many things growing here, are not meant to grow either with my hands or in my environment. And I just have to accept that because there's so many wonderful things I can choose from that are not like that.
If anybody has any additional questions for you, what's the best way for them to perhaps reach out to get those answered?
I do look at frequently and engage people through a Discord server. It's called Anthurium Affairs. And we engage conversations for general conversations, again, to healthcare, and in forum we call the Wellness Clinic. Nice, healthy plants, share what you got. And if there are questions that come along the way, I'm happy to engage. And I have excellent moderators who are helping me with that. And actually, because it's Discord, it's 24/7 around the world. Moderators both from Asia, Europe, as well here in the US and Canada. But there's actually 4 rooms there. One is the General Conversation Wellness Clinic. I also have one that's called the Delivery Suite. What is that? Propagation. So it's not delivery suite like in the hospital, but whether from seed hybridizing, from tissue culture, direct divisions, all conversations about propagation. There's another forum there that's called House Calls. That's the name we used to have when doctors actually went to your home if you were sick. So that's where we talk about different pathogens, perhaps thrips, xanthomonas, rarely things like rust. But those pathogens that happen that makes plants sick. You got a sick plant? We can talk about it on a house call. And then finally, there's one last platform within Discord, and that's what we call grand rounds in hospitals, each department generally has one day a month or so where you bring in a speaker to talk about a specific subject in front of the full department. For now, I plan on doing some of those grand rounds. Previously, we did one as a live stream called From Seeds to Specimens, where it was just about a 10-minute exchange, but that's where I can be reached as well as be engaged with people who want to know more about velvet leaf anthuriums.
Awesome. All right. Well, you guys, I will link that down in the description below for you so that you can easily access that. And I really hope you guys have enjoyed coming along with us today on this video. Once again, a big thanks to you. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If so, please be sure to click that like or subscribe button down below. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Aloha!
She's great.